Hey everyone, it's Types, joined again by Uncommon Fossil, and today we're actually going to be talking about something a bit different, I guess. Really, we don't have too much of a focus other than Pokemon, but we're going to be talking about single prizers. In fact, I guess sticking with alternate formats and the fact that we're talking about single prize only formats or a single prize only format in standard. For those of you who don't know, there have been various online tournaments focused around exclusively
Mhm.
single prize Pokemon in the standard format. We're going to talk about, first of all, how that format would look. So first of all, Uncommon Fossil, what are your thoughts on that format?
Single prize format is, I think it's a lot of fun, right? It makes the games a little longer because you don't have multi prize knockouts, at least unless you're hitting the bench too. So more opportunities to think about things, to strategize. It gives you there's more turns in the game, so you can try to set things up more. And then you can't just grab the latest IRL tournament and grab the top decks there because they're probably based around multi prize Pokemon.
Yeah, one thing I'm not a huge fan of in the format is that oftentimes the person who sets up and then just takes the first prize wins,
Hmm.
but because of various things, including spread and defensive options, that's not necessarily the case. I think a lot of the Pokemon are generally designed to be able to one shot or be able to potentially one shot multi prizers, meaning that they're easily going to be cutting down single prizers.
Hmm.
So I think that's a bit annoying. But some of these, when we've been looking at decks, not all of them do that certainly. So what
Yeah.
deck do you want to talk about first here?
Well, just let me say one other thing on it. For single prize matchups, a lot of times it's consistency. Taking the first prize obviously is huge, but then can you attack every turn, right? Because especially for a single prize deck that's made to go up against multi prize Pokemon, you got to do big damage, but you can miss a turn every now and then. With single prize versus single prize, you have to keep it up turn after turn after turn for 6 turns, which a lot of decks aren't built for. So that's a different challenge too, which I think is fun.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, I mean, the place to start, I think, is a deck that is a standard deck, single prize deck, and that's Lost Zone, right? Obviously, often it plays in with multi prize Pokemon, but the Lost Zone engine's super strong. You have Cramorant to attack with, you have Sableye to attack with. You can, and we'll get into this, but they generally allow rule box Pokemon in it. One could exclude rule box Pokemon in total, but obviously you could attack with Radiant Charizard or Radiant Greninja for an engine and an attacking option. So, it's just a strong deck to start with in standard, and also obviously it's a strong deck if it's allowed in a single prize format.
Yeah, and I think there are a few things to talk about with this deck. One, obviously, it is. I'd definitely say the best deck in standard right now, or one of the best decks, the
Hmm.
best deck that people are playing. And part of the reason why it's so good in single prize only is Sableye because of its spreading attack,
Hmm.
which does 12 damage cast for only one energy. This is very detrimental to many decks, as well as Radiant Greninja. So, as you said, some tournaments haven't been allowing, and some rule sets of this haven't been allowing rule box Pokemon. But even more importantly, one of the main cards to get banned, if they have bans in these
Hmm.
tournaments, is going to be a Lost Zone piece in either Comfey, Sableye, Colossus Experiment. Usually the card that's being banned is Comfey, I think, meaning
Yeah.
that Lost Zone is still playable.
Right, right. There's some tournaments banning comfy to try to get more creativity, right? Because that's part of the idea. Single prize, get people to think differently. So you can make Lost Zone without comfy, but you've made life a lot harder. So therefore, it's not going to be so dominant. So it's a strong option. Again, it's not as creative, right? Because it's a strong regular deck anyway.
Yeah, and I definitely think that, as I said, most tournaments are banning it. So, but if you, I suppose, they're just banning Comfey, so then you can use Baynet, which puts cards in the Lost Zone,
Right.
Lost Vacuum, and Colossus Experiment to still make those requirements just over a longer period of time. But because the games are slower, you will be able to hit it probably around turn three, be attacking with well, I don't know. You by turn two, you'll probably have four cards in the Lost Zone to attack
Yeah.
with, uh, experiment for free, and then by turn four, maybe you'll have 10 cards in the Lost Zone to be able to be using Sableye. Maybe turn three as well. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, you're going to play more Cramorants than you would in a regular multi-prize format, I imagine, because you're attacking with Cramorant turn two, getting, especially if Comfy's banned, getting the 10 for Sableye is tough. So you're going to be attacking a lot of turns with Cramorant. The nice thing is once you're set, there's no energy cost, so you can stream attackers pretty nicely with that. And then it's a question, but with the 110 damage, is it big enough to knock out your opponent's active? So if you're in an event where this deck's allowed, you might, if you get a Pokemon with 120 HP even, it slows down your opponent's start to the game.
Yeah. But then I think the other deck that's one of the like main decks that sees playing standard, not as strong, but I think in single prize it's very solid because it streams attacks easily. And you're a big fan of this deck. It's the Lunatone Solrock deck.
Yep.
Which, first of all, the Lunatone here has its attack that does more for each psychic energy attached to it, doing 120 for 3, 150 for 4, which is enough to knock out most single prizers. And then Solrock here with its ability accelerating an energy, psychic energy from your Disco Pal to your Lunatone, meaning that you can stream attackers relatively easily, making Lunatone Solrock a very solid deck. This can be helped by Radiant Greninja. But you don't need it. So I definitely think this is one of the front runners and also one of the decks that is sometimes banned from these types of tournaments because of its like incredible consistency. But also keep in mind that the low HP of the Pokemon does make it a bit vulnerable to spread, as is Lost Box. Basic attacking decks are very vulnerable to spread-based decks.
Yeah, and obviously we don't have net in format because it's based on, it's like a truncated standard format. So like with a Lunatone Solrock, those Solrocks 90 HPs, you got to get those.
Wait, what's a truncated standard format?
The single prize, right? It's
Oh yeah,
it's
with cards banned.
it's standard format, but with certain cards removed. It's not adding any older cards, and that's not an option because live you can't do friend matchups except for what they call except for standard.
Yeah.
Right. So you have these Solrocks that are on the bench that you need to get down early, 90 HP, and you need to leave them down the duration of the game. So if your opponent's sniping at those, obviously, all of a sudden you can get into a lot of trouble. But yeah, it's a strong deck. You can also, you can get it up to 150 damage per turn. So that's you should be knocking out, one-shotting your opponent's Pokemon most of the time with that. You can power it up you can stream it pretty smoothly. And like you said, you can play Radiant Greninja is a buff for the deck, but if that's banned from the tournament, the deck still certainly functions.
Yeah. And then I feel like those decks are both very straightforward. And also Lost Zone, one other thing, Mirage Gate is generally in standard crucial part of that, but in this format, I think Sableye and Cramorant are generally good enough to hold their own, but you can power up other attackers if you want. Yeah. So I think now I actually want to talk about I'll talk about the third and final, I'd say like standard deck here.
Okay.
That's gonna be the Reggie's deck, right? We have Regigigas to power up your various Pokemon. You need all the Regis in play and you accelerate energy. That being said, without Aurora energy, this deck's much weaker, but certainly a Pokemon like, say, either of the Regielekis with their spread-based attacks or snipe-based attacks are very formidable Pokemon, as well as the Regidracos. Are certainly strong as well, and you probably want to be relying on those. Regigigas itself is also pretty solid, so I think the Reggie's deck is okay, but you're just not going to have that utility. You're never going to be attacking the Regice, Regirock, or Registeel in that deck. And also, of course, that is a standard-based deck, so it's not as interesting.
Right. And obviously the Reggies have dropped off with rotation a lot, so but it's still obviously an option for this because the other decks are not as strong. But obviously less creative. I'm just off topic here, but with the new set coming out with that one special energy, will that give a bump to Reggie's, where you can attach one special energy to a Pokemon? Is that enough, or is that it's gonna not help the deck enough?
It's certainly gonna help the deck. In allowing it to be like more versatile and stuff. I think it's not gonna like make the deck like what it used to be.
No,
but I think it's still pretty solid. Honestly, I've never been like a huge fan of Reggie's. It's a very straightforward deck, and the type of deck that can just kind of be walled off very simply, which we'll actually talk about later. But yeah, I think the Reggie's deck's like okay, and I think it'll be a little better, but I don't think it's going to be good enough. Some people are talking about it because they like Regis, but
Hmm.
I think that's it.
Okay. I just asking about that. Yeah, I mean Reggie's even back before rotation was an inconsistent deck, I would say. Um, so why don't we talk about those are like the main ones that are out there as potential legitimate regular for standard decks. So we'll go to maybe Dondozo Tatsugiri, which was one of your most underrated cards before, right? Dondozo, not for
That's to Yuri.
what's that? Oh, Tatsugiri. Sorry, right. Not for this deck, of course. But
Yeah, I think that card's still good because it has attack that accelerates energy, which is nice, and an attack that hits and runs, which is also nice. So I honestly hope I expected to see play. There wasn't anything to hit and run into previously, but now there were some things, but now there are better options. So
mhm.
I'm actually excited for this one.
Right, but the Dondozo Tatsugiri combination, right, is you're attacking with Dondozo. It does for two colorless energy, so one DTE. Release rage does 50 damage per Tatsugiri in your discard pile. So just get hopefully four Tatsugiris in the discard pile as quickly as possible. With the DTE, you lose 20 damage, so you're doing 180. Which is good, obviously, even outside of a single prize format. In a single prize format, you're one-shotting probably everything, and you're 160 HP, so therefore a lot of the opponents you're up against in single prize formats aren't going to one-shot you. So a very solid deck, I think, for this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's I don't know. I don't love the energy situation. It's a bit awkward, but it's a solid deck. This is definitely based on the tournament results, one that's been seeing a lot of play.
Hmm.
And finishing quite well because of its as I said bulk. I don't know. I feel like it starts a little slow, and also like prizing can be a bit awkward to work around. It's not the end of the
Hmm.
world, but this is also again is just like a straightforward deck. I think it depends. If you're able to throw in a little bit of extra spice, I'm not sure how you do that, but I think you have room in this like format to throw in a little bit of extra something, and then you can be able to elevate it to like a very top tier deck. But it's still a very solid deck. I guess you probably play cards like Professor Burnett and probably the Curlier based engine, right? Um,
You can. I mean, I've seen it. I was working on one with a couple dittos and just supporters and discard, including Grant, just to help chuck stuff away. Um, Professor Burnett's nice. Like I was playing Lugia Archeops, it guarantees the Archeops, but it doesn't get your any other hand development. So Burnett's, it's questionable. Is my thought on it. Um,
yeah, that's fair.
and you have Pokestop potentially, right? Because you want to get those cards in the discard. Although, well, I get you can use Clara to get the Dondozos back. So, you have that. I was looking here. You can play the Articuno that your water Pokemon do 10 more damage if you think you need it, but you probably don't for this format.
Yeah, I think that's honestly a strong card overall. I don't know any obvious partners. I honestly, Dondozo is like a solid option when you're missing out on if you got like two in the discard in the early game,
Hmm.
Dondozo and you get some Articunos in the discard, you can be in a very solid spot turn one attacking for like say that 110 damage that Cramorant wants to hit. I think it's solid. As well as just with Cramorant. You could do Cramorant plus the Articunos, or
Hmm.
the other actually no, it doesn't buff Articunos, but does it buff Articunos?
No, it says except Articuno, so no.
Okay. But I still think that's fine. But I don't know. It's not my favorite deck, but I do like its high HP because of all the other than Reggie's, which has decently high HP. Dundozo has like very high HP and is low maintenance.
Right. I mean, again, while it's not one that sees a lot of play in general, it certainly has gotten attention, Dondozo Tatsugiri, so it's not as exciting of a choice, probably, from your perspective.
Yeah. So I suppose I should talk about one of the decks that are more exciting, and that's gonna be this time. I'm gonna talk about Miss Magius or Spread as a whole.
Hmm.
But Miss Magius, I think is the best spread Pokemon here. In fact, I'll talk about a few different things, but Miss Magius here has this ability that's actually really nice. If it's at full HP, KO'd by damage, you put 8 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon, which is very solid.
Yeah.
Almost as much HP as you have. It's very nice. And Eerie Voice 20 to each your opponent's Pokemon, allowing you to spread your damage throughout your opponent's side very well. Not blockable by Manaphy.
Hmm.
It will be messed up by Cheryl or just Cheryl, I suppose. if they're Radiant Serena would also be bad. But Miss
Right.
Magus here capable of doing solid spread damage, and then you can follow this up by um, doing something like Hisuian Breviary, um, which I misspelled that, but it does damage to all your opponent's Pokemon that have damage counters on them already. I believe it does 30. So it does, yeah, it does 3 damage counters, which is even better. Put for
Hmm.
free on stage 1, you do 3 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. A great follow-up attacker, can be really scary to deal with as well. Um, and then if you are playing with Radiant, you can actually use Radiant Alakazam, which can be pretty solid. Uh, and then there are also because these are 2 stage 1s, I'd actually
Hmm.
recommend almost playing it in a Zoroark style box. So I'm going to bring
Yeah.
us to another deck with Zoroark stage 1 that turns into other stage 1s, which I think is very useful if you want that like versatility, and it's just a good card all in all. Because in my opinion, the best attacker in the format actually is going to be the Slowbro from
Wow.
Pokemon Go. Yes. Because it's for stage 1 for 2 prizes for 2 colorless energy if your opponent's taken all but one of their prizes, which will essentially always happen in a single prize format. Then you
Hmm.
just get to take 2 prizes, which is really hard to do in this format because of course every Pokemon gives it 1 prize. But here I think it's very good because it allows you to go ahead in the prize and sneak in at the very end. If you're trading evenly the whole game, this will
Right.
essentially allow you to win the game. And then there's the other Slowbro that like heals, which is nice as well.
Yeah, because
Or moves damage.
right. I mean, the comeback of the Slowbro that you take 2 prizes at the onto 1, as you said, whoever goes first, and then if they keep up their attacks every turn, which is what you're trying to do, you take your prize. You take, and if you're the person that takes the second prize or takes your prize after them, you're always a prize behind them, and this is your chance to leap them at the end and win the game. So it's very nice in that for this format.
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like it's very nice. It's relatively easy to tech into any deck, assuming you have the way to like accelerate energy with probably like Raihan or something.
Hmm.
So I like this card a lot.
And assuming you're playing a Zoroark deck, right? I mean, that's really
Well, you can
because it's a
even put in
stage
like a
one.
1/1 Slowpoke. I think that's honestly doable. Or you could do a 2/2, but then a split of the Slowbros. I wouldn't hate that. But just a 1/1 is like enough to force your opponent at least to make some action in the late game, and it's kind of awkward to deal with. And even tumbling tackle 20 and both active Pokemon now asleep can be annoying to deal with. I think you'd find should can find a spot in any deck. I haven't really put it in many of the decks I've been messing with, but I think it's worth it. Maybe not in all basic deck, but I think in
Hmm.
an evolution based deck, it could definitely go in pretty much any evolution based deck.
Okay, maybe I'd have to think about that, but it could be. Um, all right, I'm going to talk about. We covered that deck, correct? So talk
Yeah, I have
about.
some other things. I'll talk about Zorak a little later as well, and Slowbro, but that's it for now.
Okay, I mean, all right. So leave them with some suspense there. I like that. So going to talk about Ambipom, which is a solid deck, which I've messed around with at times myself because it's fun, right? The Ambipom, it's a stage 1. Um, could even put it in a Zoroark deck, although I don't know if you really want it there. But it's attacked for 1 colorless energy, so that's terrific. Flip a coin for each energy attached to this Pokemon. This attack does 60 damage for each heads. So if you accelerate a bunch of energy on it, you can do a bunch of damage. You can always even start attacking early on with 1 or 2 energy. But then the really great part, so it's like Maractus, which is rotated, right? Except it's a stage 1, so a little harder, but then it's got Primate Dexterity. If any damage is done to this Pokemon by attacks, that's its ability. Flip a coin if heads prevent that damage. So a 50-50 chance of not taking damage, which means you're going to flip a number of heads over the course of the game when they hit into it. And it's also not an effect of an attack. So if you have one on the bench, one on the active, the play a rope, you send up another Ambipom, it's still a coin flip. You didn't lose that protection of it. So your opponent will probably miss an attack a couple turns because you'll flip a couple heads, and that really gives you a good chance to get ahead and win the prize race.
Yeah, and I actually want to bring up another Pokemon that apparently I don't own. but it's Hariyama from Fusion Strike with a similar ability. It's also single strike, and its attack does 100 for 3, which means it's if you pair with a single strike based deck, it should be pretty solid, allowing you to hit more consistent damage than Ambipom, which is debatably what makes it better.
Hmm.
But then if this Pokemon would be knocked out by damage from an attack, you
Yeah.
flip a coin. If heads, this Pokemon is not knocked out and its remaining HP is now 10. Uh, so that's pretty nice, meaning that you're essentially invincible half the time as well. You will be still taking damage,
Hmm.
and you're still like potentially very vulnerable to spread-based attacks. But I think this Hariyama is very solid for the same way as the Ambipom because I think it's more consistent. Although it might not be easier to power up, right? Because how would you power up Ambipom?
Well, Ambipom, the way I've built it is with the Eldegoss Cherim, which it with Pokemon, which are another two stage one, so that's the downside. But the abilities are tremendous, right? Eldegoss, for each one in play, you can search your deck for two basic energies each turn. So and obviously you can stick in whatever types of energy you want. I with this deck I'd put in grass since your Ampipom's colorless that you could attack with the Eldegoss or Cherim if it comes down to it. And then Cherim, once all you need is one in play, and as often you like during your turn, you may attach a. Oh, it has to be grass for Cherim. So sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you were waiting to correct me on that. So you attach a grass energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box. Uh, so you get a bunch of Eldegosses, get a bunch of energy, toss down a bunch of energy with Ambipom, and onto the Ambipom, do a bunch of damage. Hopefully you'll miss a few knockouts, and then get some energy. There's a number of
Your
energy.
opponent will like miss a few knockouts,
Right, I'm
right?
sorry. Right. You don't want to miss the attack when you're attacking. You don't want to miss the knockouts. You want to not be knocked out. And then you have like some energy recyclers to get energy back into the deck, energy retrieval to get those energies from the discard back into your hand. So there's those ways to get energies back, and even Clara to get a Pokemon and some Pokemon and energy back is useful in the deck.
Yeah. And so I think this is good. Of course, the coin flipping isn't very consistent. But that does actually bring us perfectly to the next Pokemon that I'm sure you were setting me up perfectly for. That's going to be Wugtrio here. Um,
Oh yeah, I left
yeah,
that off my list, but okay, yeah, no, that's
yeah. I
definitely
know. I know
an
some people are
option.
big fans of Wugtrio, and actually, in expanded in the next expansion, it's going to become very good. And even standard will be okay. But right now in this cut short standard, as I said, the games are a little bit longer, meaning that you have more turns to attack.
Hmm.
Wugtrio here having an attack for 3 colors, so this is payable with Cherim and will probably be paid with Cherim for the time being. You flip 3 coins for each heads, discard the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. So, of course, the idea here is you stick on the energies with Cherim, and then you just mill cards until your opponent is out of cards in their deck. It depends how
Yeah.
lucky you get, and there is no way to control the coin flips, but that's a solid option.
Hmm.
And some people like it a lot. I think it's fine. I don't think it's amazing. And I suppose you also have Blunder Policy as an actually really interesting engine. That being if you flip any tails with your attack, then you draw
Hmm.
3 cards, which is nice.
Right, and with the Wug Trio, it's what, three colorless, so you could attach if you're knocked out, manually attach a DTE and accelerate with Raihan too. Is another way right now to get it
Yeah.
set up. So.
Mhm.
And then one of the questions, which I don't, how in a single deck format, how aggressive does your opponent have to be? That's always for any mill deck a big question, right? So I'm not sure in general if decks are more or less aggressive in terms of digging through their decks. Probably, I would think less aggressive, but I'm not sure on that.
Yeah, I think they're also. I also agree. Pokemon that are the most aggressive Pokemon, in my opinion. Like when you think of like fast aggressive decks, you probably think of Genesect V with Mew, VMAX, and Meloetta possibly.
Hmm.
Trying to dig through the deck really quickly. You obviously don't have that here. Um, Radiant Greninja, if that's like a aggressive card. But this could be good decks like Lost Zone. Probably not because of the spread, but theoretically it could. I think it's an okay option.
Hmm.
But then also, I like Mill some, but I like Control more. And so you can play that with Zoroark. You can play these other cards with Zoroark. But there are actually some walling options. So going back to that Zoroark aspect with the Slowbro,
Hmm.
the Slowbro, which I alluded to earlier. I don't know if I mentioned directly, but it moves damage counters from your other Pokemon to Slowbro.
Yep.
So therefore, if you have a Pokemon possibly like Hariyama, but in my opinion, even better, Torracat, um, Torracat here with its attack Gritty Claws, and Incineroar can actually copy this attack for 1 energy if you want as well. You do 40, and then if you're at full HP and would be KO'd by damage next turn, you are not knocked out, and instead you have 10 HP remaining. From there, you can move the damage off using the Slowbro, and then you can just Cheryl to heal off all the damage that you've taken, which is quite nice. And then you can also, of course, use that other Slowbro. And this Torracat's really interesting. Theoretically invincible forever. Is that actually what's going to happen? Probably not. But I think this Torracat presents like an interesting idea of a very much stall-based deck.
All right, good. Does that cover the Zorak control stuff, the main cards there?
No.
You want to discuss more now?
I have one other Zorak, or this isn't necessarily Zorak, but it's the other control-based or stall-based deck, wall stall, I should say. First of all, there are 2 water type Pokemon, actually. The first of which is Ice Cube, which has seen serious play in standard format for water colorless. Colorless on a basic, you do 70 damage, which isn't an awful amount of damage by any means, and then you're immune to basic Pokemon next turn. As you've seen, some of the best decks are basics, notably Lunatone and Solrock. You'll just completely wipe out every time if you run this Ice Cube. They just can't beat you, really. So I think this Ice Cube is very strong, but of course, if you're against an evolution deck, you have some problems. So instead, you can go with a Glaceon from Astral Radiance with its attack Frostwall, dealing 30 for 1 water on stage 1, which isn't as much damage, but it's a bit easier to pay as a stage 1, so it could be played in Zoroark. But it's also slower. But with all those facts in mind, it is now immune to evolution damage from evolution Pokemon by attacks next turn. So that covers all your bases, other than damage like counters and stuff. But we'll ignore that. So if you're either against an all basic or all evolution deck, you can win essentially automatically with these cards.
Right. Yeah, and probably a lot of these single prize decks are really they're focused on 1 or 2 attackers, and probably they're going to be just basics or evolutions. So you definitely have the potential to win with it. Now, obviously, ropes get you out. You lose the ability because these are attack effects. So that, rope boss is always out there too. But yeah, you can set up and win. 30 damage per turn. You're going to have to pull this off for like a lot of turns. So that's certainly a concern, especially if you're hitting into an evolution Pokemon, which is tankier. So what are you going to take, like 4 or 5 shots before you knock them out? That's a lot of chances for your opponent to finally get the pieces to get around it.
Yeah, definitely. But I feel like the Glaceon is like viable, and the Ice Cube is definitely solid.
Yeah.
There are other Zora control options, and there are other control options in general, but I don't feel like we need to go into them too much. A lot of them are the standard control options as well, like Crushing Hammers with loops and that, and as well as Cheryl loops, which I mentioned earlier as well.
All right, well, we'll go into a deck that would certainly not be happy against that matchup, and it's a deck that I love and I try to make work, and I talk about it too much. You certainly don't like hearing about it, but that's Castform, a gimmicky card, but one that I just want to see work, and it hasn't been good enough, and even in this format, it probably isn't. Although, once you're set up and attacking, you're not going to miss an attack because, right, if you're not familiar with it, you might not because nobody plays it, but it's got weather reading. There's other Castforms too, but these are the ones with the weather reading ability. If you have 8 or more stadium cards in your discard pile, ignore all energy costs for this Pokemon's attack. So it plays, obviously, you're going to play a lot of stadiums, looking for ways to discard the stadiums. You can build it without any energy if you don't want anything to boost off that. So it's quite nice. You need to discard, so probably at this point, when the latest time I've worked on it, plays the Kirlia engine, because that's a great way to discard. And they're obviously, the Kirlia engine's good too. So that's one of the things with the Kirlia engine. What do you want to work with? That's a strong engine. You can play the Gallade, right, to look for a supporter as a stage 2. You can play the other Gardevoir, although you're not looking to accelerate energy with it, so you're probably not going to play that. And so once you're set up, it's really strong attacking, right? It's free retreat, 70 HP, so very vulnerable to spread. That's for sure. And if you have the Kirlias down, you have these 80 HP stage 1s, these 70 HP basics. Spread's going to wipe you out. But You don't miss an attack once you start. The one attack on the fire one does 150 damage. You discard a stadium in play, so you have to replace it if you need to use it the next turn, but you have a lot of stadiums. 150 is one shot. You hit pretty much everything. You have one, a snowy form that does 120. It just can't attack that next turn, but it's just that specific Pokemon. So you can have another snowy form on the bench, switch between them against free retreat. So getting another attacker is easy to do. 120 again will probably knock out a lot of the cards in format. And then you can also put in, well, there's two other ones. There's the colorless one, which I don't think is very useful. But then the one with rainy form that's a spread one does 20 to each of your opponent's Pokemon. Not great damage, but if they've just missed, if you missed a knockout, then it's useful for that. Or if they have a lot of like 60 HP Pokemon in particular, start just getting those damage counters on. Look for a multi-prize turn after like 3 or 4 attacks. Can be pretty good too.
Yeah, I think it's solid. As you said, this deck's like vulnerable to spread, which I don't like.
Yes.
I don't think the deck's very good. As you said, it streams attacks pretty easily and hits hard, but it's probably slower than most of the other decks. And because of your low
Yeah.
HP, you're always going to be getting KO'd. So unfortunately, I am still a Castform hater. It is not good enough. It's not awful. Honestly, the Weather Force one, which is like you draw until you have 6, isn't awful. It does 80, which is oftentimes enough in this format to grab KOs. Not always, but there will be opportunities when that's useful, which is nice. But then, like, what do you do when you've drawn the cards? You only need like one rescue carry like every 2 turns to be able to attack, and also there are Pokemon like even Dondozo, which you don't one shot, even with the quote unquote strong cast form. So it has problems.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the 150, I don't think that's an issue with it. It doesn't set up quickly enough is the big problem. And the one with the Weather Force attack that draws to 6 is nice in theory, but the problem is you still can't attack for free until you have all your stadiums in 8 stadiums in the discard pile. And once you have the stadiums in the discard pile, you're really set for the game because they're so, you can search out this Pokemon with Level Ball, recover with Rescue Carry. They have free retreat, so you don't really need switch. So once you're set, the deck just sails from there.
Yeah.
All right. But yeah, it's not a good deck. I want it to be a good deck. I don't even think it's a good enough deck for this format. All right. I'm going to throw out another deck that's a little better, but still a little sketchy, and that's Houndstone Grievard. So let me call it up a second.
I got it here. So
Okay.
Houndstone here. The stage 1 for 2 Psychic Energy does 80 plus 10 more for each Psychic Pokemon in your discard pile. It also has 140 HP, which isn't awful. It's not the best, but it certainly can live attacks. So you have that, and then that's a solid attacker. And then there's the Grievard, which is the pre-evolution for 1 Psychic. It just does 10 for each Psychic Pokemon in your discard pile.
Yeah.
And of course, the idea is that you get lots of Psychic Pokemon in your discard pile to do very big damage, or at least big enough. If you have, let's say, 10 Pokemon in your discard pile, Psychic Pokemon, which is a bunch. Like Mad Party decks would love to get that early. But then you're going to be hitting 180 with your Houndstone, 100 with your Grievard, and that's very solid. And how much HP does Grievard have?
The Grievard is 70, and the Houndstone's 140, which is obviously 140 is a very solid number.
Yeah. And you've been messing around with this deck, right?
Yeah, and it's okay, but it's come up a little short. But it does have promise, right? Because it's Psychic, so therefore, and you need your Pokemon in the discard. So a lot of Psychic Pokemon means Kirlia Engine, right? Which is a very effective engine and gets the cards in the discard pile. And then you can also play the stage 2, the Gardevoir, a single prize one that you look at the top 2 cards. You can accelerate basic energies right to your Pokemon any way you like, so that's nice. Or the Gallade to get a supporter each turn, so those are nice options too. And there's some other Pokemon you can put in. Cresselia has a little bit of usefulness. I was putting together a bit of a techie deck to try to give some options to kind of get tricky towards the end of the game. The Dene, if you only have 1 prize left for 1 energy, does 80 damage, which your opponent does.
This is probably less than your Grievard is going to be doing at that point.
That's true enough. So maybe I should drop that. But it has some promise. The deck, one thing is it suffers is I figured out, I learned working on it from the loss of net, right? Because once you get these Kirlias on your bench, which are at least two Pokemon, right? The basic and the stage one. In some cases, you might even want to get a Gallade down or something. That's a stage two. So all these, so you're filling up your bench with these Kirlias to get going. And then all of a sudden you have a lot of Pokemon on the bench that you can't discard. So that hurts the deck. And I've kind of realized that and trying to adjust for that. But obviously, it's a solid engine, and then you can figure out the supporters and trainers you want. You don't need a high energy count with the deck either, because you're using Raihan and such to accelerate. So, I mean, there is the non-single prize format, although some people call it a single prize still, where they put in the Gardevoir EX and still call it a single prize deck. But obviously, that would not be for a true single prize format.
Yeah. Which is like a standard deck, which I don't think is a particularly strong standard deck. It's not awful. I'm not honestly a big fan of Gardevoir in general. It's okay, but it starts slow and it's kind of inconsistent.
Yeah.
Is with the Greaver deck, but I actually have a different Psychic Pokemon that I realized we kind of forgot about in the good basics and standard. Although this one
Okay.
isn't as good, and also it does benefit from some multi-prizers, but that's Clefairy.
Hmm.
The one that accelerates energy. So you switch your Clefairies around, and then you like accelerate to your other Clefairies, and then you also do big damage for all the energy attached. It's very much like Lunatone and Solrock. I'd say it's
Right.
probably worse than Lunatone and Solrock, but it's certainly a deck.
It's a deck. Yeah, I mean, I've messed around with this one too. I'm guilty of that. Yeah. So it's a gimmicky card. Obviously, you can get a bunch of energies going eventually after a couple turns, um, and it's okay. But that's probably about it. So
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I think if like Lunatone and Solrock wasn't there, it'd be pretty solid. But generally, it hits less damage consistently, and it has less HP, which isn't great.
right.
So
All right. I'm trying to look through things here.
okay, I
You
got
you have
another
something?
deck.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a few actually. So I guess we'll talk about the Cryogonal decks, right? And
Hmm.
these are other
Yes.
ones I've seen playing standard. Cryogonal is actually seeing a lot of play in standard right now. What has the attack that says, look at the top 6 cards of your deck and attach any number of basic energy you find there to your Pokemon any way you like, and then you shuffle the other cards back. I'd say the best partner for this in this format is going to be that Kyogre, which I misspelled. But it's the one that you discard cards from the top of your deck, and then you do bench snipe damage to your opponent's bench for each energy you discard that way in this way.
Hmm.
So you have this Kyogre Cryogonal deck, which has very solid bench damage as well as very solid. I don't know. It has just a lot of energy, and that's pretty much the whole
Yeah.
point of the deck. But it's actually a solid deck. I think it's worth playing. Or you could run the Groudon, which is a fighting type version that does big damage to the active. Honestly, it's overkill, but I know it could be useful as well at certain times.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a deck that you can go with. Now you got a lot of energy, so obviously consistency can be always an issue with that type of deck for one thing.
Yeah,
Um,
and in this format, I'm a bit worried about Manaphy. I don't know how many people play Manaphy. In my opinion, I've chosen to play Manaphy in all the decks I run because I'm scared of these like decks like Kyogre and other spread based attackers. Um, so that would be bad for you. You pretty much lose at that point,
yeah,
depending how you're running the deck. But if they're not running Manaphy, I think you're often in a very good position.
yeah, and that's an interesting thought to me because a deck for a tournament, if you're going into a tournament versus a deck just for random games in the ladder, I'm inclined for just playing the ladder ranked or not to drop the mana fees and just okay, if it's a spread deck, I'm just going to take the loss, but I'm not going to see spread decks that often, so I'd rather have that 60th card help my deck set up better. But for a tournament, you can't afford that hard loss to a deck or two. That's kind of my
Um,
thought process in that.
yeah, that's probably true. Um, and then let's see. Do you have any other decks you want to talk about right now, or should I
Um,
bring up my next deck?
no, I have one here, which I've told to you before, and you've told me is bad, and you might be right,
That's
but
most of your decks.
that is. But yeah. Well, all right. This is the Palmot deck. All right, it does.
Oh,
See, look, it's a stage two. That's a problem. But listen to it. It does 230 damage. You discard all the energy. Okay,
You
but
don't need to do 230
well,
damage.
that's a problem, right? For this format, it's overkill, right? Well, unless they're playing Waylord, right? I don't know if that's where you're going next, but yes. But listen to it. It's a fun concept. It has an ability. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for a basic lightning energy and attach it to this Pokemon, and then shuffle your deck. So you get a couple Pawmots on the bench that you start powering up. So then you do the 230. You discard the energy, but you've been working on your next one, and it's free retreat. So it's a pivot, and everybody loves a pivot card too. So you then just swing into the next one, and 130. Hopefully, you're not getting knocked out. Some decks can't do that. So you have that to go with, and I'm taking a look at it. So it's okay. You have the Pachirisu you can attack with also, right? For two lightning energy. That's in the deck too, I think. And everyone discharge does for two energy. 10 plus 20 more per best lightning Pokemon. So you can attack with that early if you get two lightning energy into play, either attaching 2 turns in a row or just accelerate one with a Raihan, and then you get that attacking while you're getting your Pawmots set up. So not a horrible deck. You know what you can play with it? You can play Electric Generator, which I really like that. Yes, it doesn't solve every problem in the world, but it certainly can fit in this deck. We need a lot of energies anyway in the deck list because it's an energy hog. That attacker of Palmot. But you get it set up and you play your 4 rare candy, so you hit rare candy every turn you need it. That's never a problem. Mesa goes, you flip heads every time, and you're good to go. And you can play Stormy Mountain to get those basics into play. So the deck smooth sailing all around.
Okay, so I think I have a few things to say about it. Not the Palma, I said already that it's bad, but the
Okay.
Pachirisu I think is actually interesting. First of all,
Yeah.
the attack name everyone discharge, I really don't like that. But secondly, this is like that's the best part of the deck. It's actually very solid. It can hit 110 if you have a
Yes.
full bunch of lightning, which is not bad. And as you said, you can power it up. But then pairing it with the Zapdos, which
Mm.
buffs your damage of your basic lightning Pokemon, I actually think it's very solid because I think that's just good because it allows you to hit more damage, and then you can be hitting up to 150 for this basic Pokemon with only 2 energy on it. So I think the
Yeah.
Pachirisu by itself is viable, and people paired it with. I think people played it. I almost must do with Miraidon, which has like a bench, like it does 90 and 30 to on your opponent's bench, which is an amazing.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I feel like there's some other lightning attacker that I'm forgetting, but I'm sure there are like solid ones. Um, I'll tell you, there's a Zeraora which is kind of okay as well, which
Hmm.
it does a bunch of damage to a stage 1 an evolution Pokemon for only 1 energy. And then I think there's actually another one you want to talk about now, Zekrom, right? With Reshiram.
Yeah. Zekrom and Reshiram is a solid combination. Let me call those up here. Do you have them up there, by the way?
Yeah, I got the Zekrom, but so pretty much the Zekrom and Reshiram, they for 3 energy on basics do 160 damage. So Reshiram is fire type for fire colorless.
Hmm.
It does 160 if you have Zekrom on the bench, and Zekrom here and they base damage 80, but then it is buffed to 160. And Zekrom does 160 for lightning colorless if you have Reshiram on the bench. And
Right.
then also, Zekrom has another attack that's bad, but Reshiram for 2 colorless energy on his basic does 20 to each of your opponent's basic Pokemon or bench Pokemon,
Right.
which is pretty alright. Don't pair it with double turbo energy; you won't do anything. But which I have done. But yeah, aside from that, it's pretty solid.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how the deck gets built. I would think you're pairing it mostly with the lightning energy. I don't know if you're mixing both in, right?
Yeah, you
Attack,
probably play Flaffy, right, to accelerate energy, which is a solid option.
right, and then you could do electric generator, obviously, to accelerate to the Zekrom um, as well. Again, that's on the bench. You have to switch it in the active. The retreat cost is 3 on these, so you're not manually. You don't ever want to manually retreat. 130 HP, so that's relatively tanky for the format. They're basic, so that's nice.
Yeah,
Um,
and actually with the upcoming set, you can pair it with Charm of Courage, buffing the HP by
mm,
50. Or you could, and honestly, most of these, or you can on all these, you can put Hot Helmet, where you take 30 less damage, I believe. You take 30 less damage, so that's nice. I don't know if people are running that, but that's a solid option in any deck where you want to have more survivability.
Right. So yeah, I don't think of the decks that I saw for the tournaments where people were playing Pot Helmet, but that's obviously very meaningful because it slows down your opponent by at least a turn or maybe even 2 turns if you're really fortunate. But that's a big swing in these games. Um, all right, you're done with that deck, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to talk about a deck which I made a video on, and I now have 4 different deck
Wait, I
lists.
think there's another
Oh,
deck
go
we
ahead.
should talk about with the defensive, right? You want to bring up Warlord as well, right?
Yeah, I
Which I'm not
mentioned
sure how
that.
that
So,
works.
all right, the whale. I don't remember the 60 per se. I gotta say. So let me take a look. So Warlord is the super tanky single prize one, right? Waylord, a stage 1, has 200 HP, and it's got the ability jumbo size. This Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. Now, I think you have to prepare. Now, that's great, right? It's great, but the retreat cost is 4, so that's just horrific, right? So you never want to retreat this. And then the attack cost is 4 energy, 3 being water. So, but it does 120 damage. If you have a special energy attached, it does 120 more, so that's 240, which actually could be useful, right? At 120, you're not one-shotting everything, but you're not even getting
Yeah.
two-shot probably, so hitting 120 per turn is okay.
Yeah, and with the new set, you can pair the reversal energy with it, but that's not how it's played, right?
No, it's played with is it the Blastoise? I think.
That accelerates energy and ends your turn.
Yes, that's I think how I've seen it.
Stage 2 that ends your turn.
Um,
Okay. Yeah, that seems questionable, especially because it doesn't. Oh no, that does accelerate special energy, right?
I'm trying to look at the card.
Yeah, it
It's
does. Yeah, it can accelerate up to 6. You accelerate up to 6 special energy, including basic or special from your deck, and attach them to your Pokemon any way you like, and then your turn ends. So yeah, you can do that. I use Blastoise to power up the Wailord, which is interesting.
right.
Um,
And it's tanky enough, hopefully, if your opponent, at that point, you need your opponent to 3-shot you to make it probably pay off because if they just 2-shot you, you've wasted a turn setting up.
yeah. So or multiple turns because you can you get the Blastoise into play ideally turn 2, which is doable with Irida, and then you accelerate the
Yeah.
energy and then your turn in. So turn 3.
You could attack turn 3 if you get an optimal start.
Yeah, which I think is doable, but I know how I feel about that.
Right. And if you get it set up, if they're taking multiple turns to knock out your Warlord, then you're manually attaching to one on the bench. It gets knocked out. By the time at that point, if you Raihan to it, you can probably stream it once you get one set up, potentially.
Yeah, I think it'll get better with upcoming sets, but for now it's okay.
Yeah.
And then you said you wanted to talk about your secret sauce, right?
It is, yeah. I waited long enough on that.
Which is my deck, by the way,
It
that I
was
found somewhere online. But
found somewhere online, but then you didn't put any effort into it. So,
no, you added like 1 card,
well, I've got
which was my
4.
suggestion.
That's true. I mean, I made a video on one build, so I'll talk about that briefly. And that deck does play Radiant Greninja, which isn't legal if you're no rule box. But
Yeah, and I think I made a video on it, and I called it like the worst deck I've ever played or something.
but it uses Ditto, which is not a bad option for a lot for decks to consider in general, right? So Ditto, if you're not familiar with it from the Go set, 70 HP basic Pokemon. It has no attack, but it's got the sudden transformation ability. This Pokemon can use the attacks of any basic Pokemon in your discard pile, except for a Pokemon with a rule box. So that's very nice for this format. So it gives flexibility, right? Just like a Zoroark gives flexibility its way, Ditto decks give their own flexibility. And then setting up within it, I'm utilizing, this is with fighting Pokemon, and I'm utilizing Ditto, and I'm using Claydol, which is from Silver Tempest, and it's got this mystery charge ability. Stage 1, you can use this ability only if you have no supporter cards in your discard pile, and obviously supporter cards are overrated, not a problem there. and then you can
Yep.
accelerate, attach one fighting energy from the discard pile to one of your Pokemon. So it doesn't have to be a fighting Pokemon. It can be the active Pokemon. So quite nice for getting set up. You just get a bunch of these stage ones on the bench without playing any supporters, of course, and it just, but it works. It's not terrible, I will say. And I've worked on the deck, getting it better. Obviously, Pokestop helps with it because now with Pokestop, you are putting cards in the discard pile and you recover items. So you want an item heavy deck with this anyway. So Pokestop makes sense. We can't recover our Pokemon so well. That's a problem. The next set will help with that when Super Rod comes out. We have Level Ball for the low HP Pokemon. The high HP Pokemon.
Rescue Carrier.
Exactly what I said. Exactly. If you heard me wrong, just, not. I'm sorry about that. Right. So Rescue Carrier and Super Rod will allow you to recover up to 3 Pokemon and energy into your deck, I believe is the phrasing of it. So I initially built it with a Bibarel Skwovet engine, but anyway, you're powering up these basic fighting Pokemon. My initial build was using Stonejourner, also from Silver Tempest, that was kind of designed to go with Claydol, because for 3 energy, it does 60 damage, but if you have no supporters in your discard pile, it does 190. So that's a very nice number to hit, right? Even in a multi-prize format. You just got to get it all set up and going without supporters. So that was kind of the one Pokemon. And then I also was playing the Terrakion in the deck, which is a nice one. Cavern Tackle does 120 damage for 3, obviously less than the Stonejourner, but then during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage from attacks done to this Pokemon. That's great. Now the downside is, besides setting it up, if one of your Pokemon use Cavern Tackle during your last turn, this attack can't be used. So it's not even fixed by switching with the bench or having another bench run the active. Cavern Tackle can't follow Cavern Tackle, which makes sense. You don't want to have an opponent that's immune to damage every turn, because it's essentially game over as soon as that happens. So, but it's a fun little pair, does a lot of damage, and you get those paralysis turns to keep things going.
Talk about that.
Oh, sorry, not the paralysis, but the no damage turns, right? Do you want me to talk about the more current build I have of it?
Yeah,
Next?
which actually you might have suggested. I think we found that online anyway, though.
There's some people online. A couple things. One of the things I realized with this deck is I need to get 3 Claydolls on the bench over the course of the game. And again, with a lot of these single prize decks, I mourn the loss of Scoop Up Net, because once you play, and which is partly why even if I was allowed to play the Radiant Greninja, I decided I don't want it. Yes, it gets to energy in the discard and sets up, but it's a bench Pokemon that's taken up a slot the rest of the game, and that eventually becomes a problem because you want 3 Claydolls. I allow myself 1 Bibarel and a Ditto on the bench, a Ditto in the active, and my other attackers in the discard, and life is golden. So again, I have the Bibarel, Claydol that accelerates if you have no supporters. I do play a Grant, which buffs the damage and helps you discard. You play it, you can recover from the discard pile with this ability, though. So you discard 2 cards from hand, it goes back into your hand, so you can still use your abilities. And one of the things also with rotation, we lost Quick Ball, and it hurts a lot of decks, including this one, that need to discard cards. That's a big problem. We have Ultra Ball, but Quick Ball was a nice option also. So I need another card to discard. Grant helps with that, I will say. And then the 2 attackers I'm using the Terrakion, like I said, that prevents damage the next turn for 120. But then Galarian Zapdos, which I think we saw from someone else's deck online, but it does have the ability, you can accelerate energy to it if you play it to the bench too from your hand, which happens sometimes. But then its attack, which you usually copy with Ditto, I prefer, but it does 70 damage for 3, not great, but then you may discard all energy from this Pokemon if you do your opponent's active. Pokemon's now paralyzed, so if you get your 3 Claydol set up, a Ditto in the active, and Zapdos and Terrakion on the discard pile, which I've worked on the deck build to get there, you're in really good shape. You attack and paralyze, attack and paralyze, attack and paralyze. When you get to the point you knock them out, you Terrakion, copy Terrakion's attack, you're immune to damage, and you kind of recycle things. The biggest problem is if your opponent sends up a lower HP Pokemon that will get knocked out by the Zapdos the next turn, which would be a 60 or 70 HP, then you're not immune the next turn and you lose that cycle. But fortunately, most Pokemon are at least 80 HP, and then you're in really good shape.
Yeah. Um, so I think that's fine. I don't know. It seems a bit inconsistent, especially I don't know the idea of like paralyzing and then attacking with Triton's good. But in single prize, it's actually worse because your opponent will just die. Like Kofi, he'll one shot.
Right. You
And
will.
other things. So
Yes.
cast form. That's a bad cast form matchup.
It is for single prize. I would
Actually, it's
prob.
okay if you're just one shotting him. It is what it is.
It's not bad, right? With that, yes. Right, then it's okay. They just can come back, but then you can still use your Tracheon attack every other turn. We're immune. We're immune, so it's not a bad option there still. And maybe for single prize format, then you want the other Pokemon, the Stonejourner, in the deck.
Yeah.
So it's actually it's a pretty it's I've got it doesn't set up terribly with you get to use cards like Gutsy Pickaxe if you want that you don't get to use every day. So it's and that's part of the fun of the alternate decks. You want to use cards besides Pokemon. You want to use some of the trainers that get neglected too, right? It's part of the fun.
Yeah. And now I think it's time. Do you have any other decks to talk about or not?
No, nothing else that needs to get covered.
Okay, so now I think it's time we talk about the possibly most notable single prize only deck that I think has exclusively earned its reputation through this format, and that is going to be the Urshifu deck, Rapid Strike Urshifu. Now, some of you may be thinking that card's like super good, but no, not the VMAX. The
No.
single prize Rapid Strike Urshifu here, which I do not own, but
Yeah, I'm
here, let me
calling
find
it
it.
up. Sorry.
So it has this attack, Rapid Fisted Rush, which does 30 for each of your Rapid Strike Pokemon in play. So assuming you have 6 Rapid Strike Pokemon in play, this is going to be doing 180. So that's quite good. Of course, that's a bit awkward to get that damage all the time, but you can pay this for 1 Rapid Strike energy. And this is quite
Yes.
nice. Then you can use other Rapid Strike Pokemon, such as Zebstrika or Phalanx, to hit for different types. Zebstrika needs to hit after a Rapid Strike Pokemon is attacked. Phalanx here is essentially the same as Urshifu, but does less damage as a basic. And then you could even use, I saw one, you said there's a list playing Cloyster, which
Yeah.
has its attack or ability that makes it take less damage, and it also does 60 and 20 and 30 to 2 your opponent's bench Pokemon, which isn't bad at all. So there's a wide variety of options you can use. And then you also have the very powerful Octillery, which allows you to
Right.
search for a Rapid Strike card every single turn. So honestly, this is one of the best decks in the single prize only format.
It is. Octillery is obviously super powerful. You have to get it set up, of course, and you really don't want to probably play any non-rapid strike Pokemon, depending what you're doing. So therefore, you can't have any other engine pieces like the barrel or something. So are you going to get it set up consistently enough? I think that's my concern with the deck. Once you're set up and once you get your Octillery in play, you should be in pretty good shape because then you do have access to the energy, the Pokemon, the supporter. The Rapid Strike supporter is what again?
Uh,
The one that draws
no, Karina's Focus.
Karina's Focus. Yeah. So which is useful again once you have access to that on turns 2 draw. They have 6 in cards in hand. Not the best supporter, but when you can search it out every turn, it's quite nice for you.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that deck's really cool. It's better than the single strike Urshifu deck, which is okay but not amazing. But that's about it. I think the other decks aren't like amazing. I guess one last deck is the Swim Freely deck. That's like a cool deck where you accelerate energy with a Finneon to various Pokemon like Dugong or Seadra. Is that the stage one? I think.
I think Seadra, yeah.
And then you can like do Kingdra and stuff, but it's okay. It's just okay. Um, yeah, I think that's it. I think the format's cool though. The idea. Certain decks like most notably Lost Zone are kind of overpowered and kind of awkward to deal with. But I think the format's cool as a whole and worth checking out. If you go to like Limitless or play Limitless, you can find tournaments for it. And then you can also just play it with your friends, right? That's honestly how most people play, anyways. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say about the format.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's fun when you get a format that forces you to think differently. Then that's what it does. The rules are not all that restrictive. It's not complicated if you just say single prize only or no rule box, which would eliminate Radiance also, or no, so it's not that complicated to figure out what decks you can play and can't play, but it gets you to think about something different. You can play a different deck. You'll see some different decks. It makes it fun.
Yeah, until it's been around for a few months, and then it isn't as fun anymore because everyone's playing the same decks.
Well, yeah, when a format's new, it's interesting. Once it's been around, it can get stale. All right, you want to close us up?
Yeah. So if you enjoyed, we'd really appreciate if you like left any feedback, or if you didn't enjoy, we'd appreciate if you left any feedback on probably one of our YouTube channels.
Yeah.
That, as I said previously, that's the best way to get in contact with us. 10 Types or Uncommon Fossil.
If you have any,
And
if you have ideas, the things you might like to hear us discuss, let us know too. We're always looking for ideas. We're kind of so if it sounds like something we could talk about a bit, we'd be happy to do that.
yeah, and also I'd say the third place to check us out, other than YouTube, would be Spotify,
Yeah.
as we do have access to some stuff from that. The other podcasting platforms that we're on, we don't really get to see much data from, unfortunately, because of how stuff's set up. So that's unfortunately is what it is. But feel free to listen to us on that as well if that's where you're listening. That's really cool as well. But definitely do check us out on YouTube. That's where we have all sorts of other content, including stuff that's relatively similar to this, honestly. And subscribe to us there and all that good stuff. But we hope you enjoyed. I'm excited to see you in the next podcast.
Take care.